Hello! This video I'm going to show you one of my prized possessions from Fantagraphics and Gemstone I believe it was published in 2000. Tales of Terror, the EC Companion, the limited edition slipcase edition. It's got that great painting by Al Feldstein. It's an entertaining comic. And the amazing thing about this is it's got this autograph sheet in it with autographs by Al Feldstein, Marie Severin, Adele Kurtzman, Sheldon Moldoff, George Evans. This little stamp was made by Sergio Aragonés, and he used to use that a lot. William Gaines used that a lot in the office for rejecting things. No. And then there's autographs by Will Elder, Jack Davis, John Severin, Nick Meglin, Jerry DeFuccio, Al Williamson, Fred von Berkel, he's one of the authors of the book, and Grant Geisman, Angelo Torres, Johnny Craig, and Joe Orlando. Amazing piece of history there with those autographs. I think all those artists are now deceased in the 25 years since this came out. And there's a good shot of William M. Gaines in the office. Tales of Terror. If you haven't seen this book, it's a great collection of knowledge about EC Comics. I hate that light. It's not putting some glare on there. So the checklist was first published in 1955. There were 50 copies. Second printing was 1956, 200 copies. And the third printing in June 56, 75 copies. The complete EC checklist supplement, first published in March 1958. 350 copies. The full volume of the EC checklist, first printing July 1963. And it's been updated a few times. But it's really great. Fred Van Berkowitz, he went to the EC offices when he was a kid, when they were still being published. Isn't that amazing? Got to meet Bill Gaines and had a little conversation. It talks about William M. Gaines in the Senate subcommittee testimony, where Frederick Wortham had written the book Seduction of the Innocent, caused a big row. And Gaines had the nerve to stand up to the Senate and testify about how his books were not trash, they were worthwhile. It's an interesting transcript. I sent away for that when I was a kid, reading this Senate transcript. And let's see what else. Max Gaines, credited with creating the first comic books. He was a salesman for an outfit that printed Sunday strips, and one day he was there watching it, and he said, "Hey, I could put a cover on one of these and sell them for $0.10." And sure enough, he created something new. Drawing by Sheldon Mayer. congratulations on their wedding. Sheldon Mayer was credited with being the guy who said, yeah, buy Superman, that's a good idea. And the index starts with the pre-trends. There's a nice ghastly Graham Engels artwork from one of the pre-trend westerns. And it just goes chronologically, I think. Chronologically and alphabetically. And it's got all the picture stories from the Bible. It has a list of all the authors and artists, all the stories in the book. Picture stories from American history. Picture stories from world history. And some of these really obscure Tiny Tot comics. Land of the Lost. These things would have been lost in time if it hadn't been for some of the scholars who collected them and preserved them for us to be able to see these little pictures of them. Blackstone, Dandy Comics. Max Gaines sold, he owned All American Comics, which had Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and The Flash, and he sold them to DC to start his own company, EC, which stood for Educational Comics. I don't know how educational Dandy Comics was, but he had an idea. He wanted to publish a certain standard of comics, and so he did. Some of the more interesting ones were like Gunfighter. Had artists like Johnny Craig and Al Feldstein, Graham Engels. And there's the Happy Houligans, Saddle Justice, and that turned into Saddle Romances. It started out as Happy Hooligans for 2 issues, became Saddle Justice for 3 through 7, 8, and then it became Saddle Romances. Cool. Just the evolution of some of these stories are really cool. International Comics, Crime Patrol. This is where they introduced horror comics. And I can't remember whether it was 14 or 15. I think it was 15. The first Tales of Terror. 2 issues of Crime Patrol. And then it turned into Crypt of Terror and then Tales from the Crypt. War on Crime, Moon Girl. And Moon Girl Fights Crime. And there's an interview with Sheldon Moldoff, who's best known for he ghosted Batman for Bob Kane for many years. He was, I think, the original artist on a Hawkman feature, and then he drew that for several years, and then he went into the Army. And when he came out of the Army, Joe Kubert was drawing Hawkman, and he couldn't get his job back, even though returning veterans were supposed to get their jobs back. But he kind of had a falling out with DC, and they wouldn't hire him. But Bob Kane hired him, and he drew Batman for many years under Bob Kane's pen name. Well, it's not a pen name, but he ghosted it. Tales from the Supernatural. There's all kinds of just really awesome stuff in here. Al Feldstein. This is a feature interview with Al Feldstein. That's some tie you got there, Al. How'd you like to have these beautiful mint comics in your collection? I know I would. And he talks about some of the early features he worked on. Junior, Homer, Haphazard. I did a video earlier on Junior and Sonny, the deluxe edition, and they reprinted those. And long interviews. I slogged through all these interviews. There's lots of interesting stuff. There's a painting he did. The Comics Code talks about how that came about, and then it prints the text of the Comics Code. Try and Stop Me. Not sure what that is. Oh, it's a book by Bennett Cerf. Oh, yeah. They got some of his ideas from some of these, Gaines would call them springboards. He would read these books and he'd get, oh, that'd be a good idea for an EC story. There's a Moon, a Girl, romance. Kind of evolved from Moon Girl into Moon Girl romance. To Modern Love. There's the EC Artist Gallery. These are paintings by Graham Engels. He was an interesting story. After he got out of comic books, he never really wanted to look back at it. He became an art teacher, and he would never talk to anyone who would come up and ask him about his comic work. He didn't really want to talk about it. So, like, towards the end of his life, he did a few paintings. These are by Johnny Craig. Johnny Craig continued on in comics for, I guess the rest of his life. He worked for Marvel for a while and worked around for some indie publishers to gave him some jobs. These are Christmas cards. Photo gallery. Might be interesting to look. I guess the setup won't move too closely. Let me see. If you can see these pictures of I can't really make them out too well. Sorry about that. Messed up my lighting now. I got this new contraption so I can do my videos hands-free. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the collection, the new trend comics, starting with the Vault of Horror, which was formerly the War on Crime. Starts with number 12. It's got, lists all the artists and the authors and the story titles, of course. And Vault of Horror. Sorry, make you seasick there. I hit my little deal there. Vault of Horror went through number 40. Then Crypt of Terror was formerly Crime Patrol. And then it became Crypt of Terror for 17, 18, 19. And then Tales from the Crypt starting with number 20. I believe it went up to 45 was the last issue. A little ad, I guess. Interesting, all these little interesting nuggets that you get. Well, I'm not going to go through every issue because it's going to get tedious, but it goes through all the titles, the horror, the science fiction, weird fantasy, weird science fantasy, and the war comics, Two-Fisted Tales, and Frontline Combat, and then the suspense, crime suspense, and shock suspense. And of course, Mad, which came from, there was EC 3D Classics. There's 2 issues of that. Then Mad came along. Harvey Kurtzman wanted a raise, and Bill Gaines says, well, I can't exactly give you a raise, but I could, if you want, we could do another magazine. So Kurtzman came up with Mad. First few issues parodied EC Comics. And with that, it's my invoice. Bill and Al stories. And here's an interview, a vintage interview from 1969 with Bill Gaines from Spoffon. That was a cool magazine. I bought that one back in the day. And talk with Adele Kurtzman, which is Harvey Kurtzman's wife, after he and his widow after he passed on, talking about his career. And then they get into the New Direction, which, piracy is more properly in the new trend, I think. It started in 53. Tales of Terror, the annuals, which they would return the books, and they would bind like 3 books together into an annual, slap a cover on it. Those are very collectible these days. It was 3 Tales of Terror, 2 Weird Science Fantasy, and 2 Two-Fisted Tales. Then there was the New Direction and the Picto Fiction. Impact, most notable for Kurtzman's Master Race story in number 1. Valor, that was showcase for Al Williamson and Wally Wood primarily. Joe Orlando. Aces High, that was George Evans's baby. He loved drawing the World War I airplanes. Extra was Johnny Craig's baby. Well, there was also a lot of work by Severin and Crandall. And Psychoanalysis, that was all Jack Kamen, all the artwork in that. And MD was also Johnny Craig. Some Graham Angles too, George Evans and Davis, but Craig did, well, I guess he did the covers. Guess he didn't really do the stories. Shock Illustrated, Crime Illustrated, Terror Tales, Confessions Illustrated. Those were magazine sized, and they tried to, tell stories, and there would be like text with illustrations. Didn't really go over that well. Then during the 60s, they started, I guess the first reprints were these Ballantine, I think they're Ballantine paperbacks with great Frazetta covers. Those are highly collectible. I forget what it was called, the horror comics of the 50s, this hardcover. I never ever got a copy of that. I always wanted it, and I never did get a copy of it. EC Portfolios, I missed the first one, but I got the second, third, fourth, fifth. I don't know if I ever got the sixth. In my contest for the subscriber giveaway is going to be the 4th issue of EC Checklist, of the EC Portfolio, which reproduces the original art in black and white. Very nice book. Next came the East Close Comics. They did a dozen issues of that. Then he did some the complete EC library, which was hardcovers and slipcase editions. It's an elegy to EC. Let us sit on the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. There's some hoo-ha, an early Mimeo fanzine. Biographies of the artists. And a chronology of EC from the very beginning, 1942. Grim fairy tales, some stories that appeared in the horror stories that were kind of had a lighter edge to them. Ray Bradbury, they started adapting Ray Bradbury's stories, and eventually he contacted him and said, hey, you know, I really like the treatment you're giving my stories, but how about paying up? And so then they started putting him on the cover. And Bender, was it Ed? Ian Otto Bender, science fiction artists, writers of the Adam Link stories. Jack Mendelson on writing for Panic. Nick Meglin on Panic and the Flegels. It's Angelo Torres. Flegels was Angelo Torres, George Woodbridge, Frank Frazetta, and Al Williamson, the youngsters that kind of worked together to get things done for one another on their stories. A lot of interesting art background on that. Roy G. Krenkel had a big influence on all the Flegels. And there were these great, sorry about that, these great flyers or, see if I can get a little closer look at that. It's one by John Severin. It's got all the bullpen. There's one by Bill Elder. I wonder if I can do that. Get a little closer look at it. And I don't know how effective that is. But you get the idea. There's one, Marie Severin did a few of those. And there's old MC Gaines, a narrative illustration, The Story of Comics by MC Gaines. He wrote about his, I wonder if those are the same racks that had the ECs in them. Bible stories, American history, animal fables. History repeats. Oh, it's just like different from the time of the Egyptians up through history, different cartoons, because he published this Funnies on Parade. It's one of the first ever comic books that MC Gaines published, and also Wonder Woman #1. He was an interesting character. He died in a boat crash in, I guess, 1949. And then Bill Gaines was faced with a quandary what to do. He was never really that interested in the comic book business, but he decided to give it his best shot and changed it from educational comics to entertaining comics, and then proceeded to put out some of the best comic books that were published up to that time. Some say some of the best ever, but there were definitely some flaws with the EC system of the stories were printed on the paper, and then the artist had to draw pictures of what the words said on the caption, which wasn't the ideal way to do it. But an interesting thing about Bill Gaines is he saved 20 copies of every comic book that he published and all the original art, and he kept it in a vault. which turned out to be very fortuitous, which made him a lot of money in his later years. There he is with all these comics. Every time an issue would come out, he'd take 20 copies of it and wrap it up in brown paper and shove it in a box. Very foresight. He had a lot of foresight. And then at the end, there's an index to the stories. So if you know the name of the story, you can look it up and find out what issue it was in, what the date was. And that's it. Well, if you stuck with me, I hope you enjoyed this look at entertaining this is the slipcase edition of Tales of Terror. It's long out of print and very expensive, but there is an inexpensive, well, I wouldn't say inexpensive. This can go for anywhere from $50 to $100 of just the regular edition of the same book. It's just not autographed and no slipcase, but you can get your hands on it, and there's even a paperback version of it. So if you're into EC, it's there for you. Well, thanks a lot. If you enjoyed this, give me a like and put a comment down below, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.